Hello and welcome to the Tower Defense game tutorial series here on HyperCube Games. In this episode we're going to be working on having the actual turret shoot things being the enemy. And this will take about 2 episodes to actually do. So in this episode we're going to get about half of the actual thing done. In the next one we're going to get shooting completed. So let's jump right into it. So the first thing we want to do is have this turret here in our project menu. And we're going to drag it to this cube here, cube number 16. I think about right there, that position. Put it right in this position here. And we need to add the range to our little turret prefab here. So let's go to game object, 3D object, and sphere. And we're going to drag that into the turret. We're going to call this range. And we're going to make it at exactly 0, 0, 0. Just like that, and then we're actually just gonna make it big. So okay, that looks a bit odd right there, but that's just fine. Yeah, so we're actually gonna just disable its mesh renderer, because all we really want is the collider. This nice green part right here is all we really want, because that's gonna be colliding with the cubes itself. So we're actually gonna lower the range down to, I guess, about minus 0.5 should be good. To sense out the cubes. And now we actually want to add a graphic for the what's it called, for the range itself, so you can actually see it. You can physically see the range itself. So we're going to drag a new sphere, make a copy of the old one, and drag it into the actual range. So we have a child called the same thing. We're going to call this range graphic. There we go. And now instead we're actually going to re-add those mesh filters and the mesh renderer. We're gonna make the mesh sphere, and it's gonna look super wonky and weird, but don't you worry about that. We're actually gonna set its Y scale, so that's at 0.01. And this makes it so you actually see the range like that. It's a bit too high though, so let's grab the range graphic and lower it to about, yes, minus 0.01. Minus 0.01 minus. Actually, let's not mess around with the range graphic. Let's just lower the actual range. So let's set the range to actually -1, and that should leave the range graphic down to the bottom. So let's get rid of this pink stuff here. We're gonna go to the materials. I made a new one. It's called transparent. It's just a white color with the alpha set to 26, and we're just gonna drag that on there, and there we go. Now we have a nice looking range here. So if we go back to the game view, we can see the range of how it does. So if we click on play, you can see it in a bigger light here. As you can see, nothing's happening obviously because we haven't set anything up for it. So let's do that. So let's select the range here. But before we do that, I can see that range graphic also has the collider here, so we don't want that. Let's remove that component so it's only a graphic. There we go. So now if we resize this, the graphic will resize with it. So let's click on range and let's add a new script to just the range. We're gonna call this the turret defense. Well, not really turret defense, turret shoot. There we go. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so now that we have turret shoot opened up, let's start scripting. So first of all, what we're gonna want to do is import something called system.collections.generic. This allows us so we can use certain things when we're using a certain variable type called list in this script here. So I added an extra L there. Let me just fix that. And now let's add our variables. So our first variable is going to be called enemies. It's going to be of type list, and it is going to be a game object, list of game objects. Next, we're going to have it another script, another variable called bullet, also of type game object, but not a list. Next, we have shoot cooldown left of float. Let's get rid of that H there, capitalize. And next, shoot speed is of type float. And finally, we have our final variable target, which is of type game object. Alright, so now that we have these variables, let's go into the function start, and what we're going to do here is establish that enemies is actually a list. As we did in the variable itself, we're doing in the start function actually make it so it's established as one. Alright, so first of all, what we're going to be doing is making shoot cooldown left minus equal time dot delta time. So what this does, I've already explained it back in the wave spawn episode, but don't worry about it, I'll explain it here once again. So it's going to basically just subtract whatever this number may be, subtracting it by 1 every second. Okay, and there you go, that's exactly what that does. And now we're going to make a nice thing here, an if statement, and it's going to have a conditional of shoot cooldown left as long as it is less than or equal to 0, and at the same time enemies dot count is greater than 0. Then at that moment we're going to be we're going to be spawning in our bullet. So let's spawn that in. So we're going to make a variable called clone, and it's going to be equal to instantiate. Instantiate, our thing that we're spawning in is obviously bullet, and where we're spawning it is at a new vector 3. And in this vector 3, we're going to make it go at what's called the range's position.x, its transform.position.y plus 2, and finally its transform.position.z. And there we go. Now we're going to type in at the end after this parentheses quaternion.identity to handle the rest of the spawning. Alright, so that is what we're doing here. Now the reason why we're making it a variable is so that anytime we spawn something in, we're going to make it so that clone.transform.parent is equal to this.transform. So what this does is it makes it so that since this script is applied to the range, what it does is it makes it so that our bullet that we're spawning in is always going to spawn in as a child of range. So there we go. We're setting its parent to this, which is the range. Alright, so finally we're going to type in here that shoot cooldown left is equal to shoot speed. So this just makes it so that once shoot cooldown left is less than or equal to 0, it makes it so that it goes all the way back up to whatever we set here. Shoot speed is actually going to be basically shots per second that are there. So if we set it to 1, it's always going to shoot after every second because it's always going to be set to 1 at the end of spawning. Alright, so next we're going to type in an if statement once again called enemies. We're going to test whether or not enemies dot count is greater than 0. What this does is it establishes target. Target will then equal enemies of index 0. There we go. So enemies is spelled wrong there. There we go. And yeah, that's all it's doing. It's just establishing that target is going to be equal to enemies of the index of 0. I'll explain why we're doing this in a little bit. So next, another if statement. We're going to be testing whether or not enemies.count is greater than 0 once again, but this time we're also going to add that if enemies is enemies index of index 1 is equal to null, which is nothing, there's nothing there, then at that moment grab enemies and remove at that position where at index 0, remove whatever is there, which is nothing, and just remove it. What this does is it shifts the first index up to 0, 2 to 1, 3 to 2, and so on. Alright, so there we go. And now that we're done with the update function, we're done with the update function, so there we go. Now we're going to make a new function that is going to be called onTriggerEnter. And it's going to be of type info collider in our little parameters here. So now we're going to make a if statement within this, and we're going to test whether or not info.tag is equal to enemy. And then after that, we're going to make it so that enemies dot add info dot game object. And let's make that non-capitalized there. Alright, so what this does is just test whether or not we have touched or something of tag enemy has touched us at that moment. Grab that thing that touched us and add it to our list of enemies. And finally, our final function here is going to be called onTriggerExit. So whether or not something exits our collider here, we're going to use the same parameters, info collider. And what's going to happen is we're just going to make it so that enemies.remove at 0. Alright, so we have finished the script. It was actually really easy to make, but I'm going to go over it entirely, and let's get started with that. So, at the beginning, we made it so that we were importing the system.collections.generic. This allows us, I think, so that we can use the count little thing here so that we can test whether or not we have a certain count of enemies. It also allows us to do a ton more things with lists as well. Alright, so in our function start, I already said that we're establishing enemies as an actual list in the start function. And so here, in this if statement, we're testing whether or not shoot cooldown left is less than or equal to 0, and at the same time if enemies is also greater than 0, or if the amount of enemies is greater than 0, then spawn in our bullet, make sure that at the same time it is going to be the child of this object, which is the range, and that shoot cooldown left is equal to shoot speed. And there we go. So here we're just setting whether or not if the amount of enemies we have is greater than 0, then set target enemies to equal to 0. Then here we're testing whether or not enemies count is greater than 0, but enemies 0 is equal to nothing, then remove 0. So that shifts just like I mentioned earlier. And then here we're testing whether or not we have touched enemies or enemies has touched us, then add it to our list, and if they leave, remove it. Remove the first index. Alright, so that's exactly how we do this nice turret shoot script. And so now that we're done, let's get back into the game. Alright, so now that we're back in the game, you can see that turret shoot has loaded up with all of the variables that we have created here. You can see that our list of enemies has a size of nothing. Now we do not need to actually establish a size for enemies, because it's automatically adding and removing from the list itself, so we don't need to mess around with that. But for bullet, we need to actually make one. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so let's click on Game Object, 3D Object, and let's make a sphere. Let's go into the scene view here. It's going to be of size, it's going to be of a very small size, about 0.25, 0.25, and 0.25 on all X, Y, and Z scales, axes. Put it at 0, 0, 0, so that we can work with it a little better. And we're going to make this of a yellow color, the exact same color that we made the shooter up there. So let's go to our materials and drag in yellow right there for our nice bullet here. So now that we've done that, that's pretty much it for the bullet. Yes, it's very, very easy to make. So let's rename it as bullet, and let's drag that into our prefabs folder here. So there we go. We have made the bullet. So now we're going to delete that from your hierarchy, and let's click on the range, and let's drag in bullet from the project menu and put it right there. Alright, so now that we've done that, we want to make sure that shoot speed, we're going to be changing this. Shoot speed, let's make it so that it spawns in a bullet every second. Let's make it so that it spawns one every single second. That'll be how many shots we have per second. So for target, we don't need to establish this either, as it is automatically established in the script. Alright, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and click on play. Let's see if this actually works out here. Let me make it so it's not maximized, but you can see here how it's not doing anything at all. It is not actually letting anything happen here. And the reason why is because we actually haven't set enemy as any form of a trigger. We haven't set enemy as a trigger. We need to make it so that because it's called onTriggerEnter, the function that we used. So we kind of need to use it in order for this to work. So, and also at the same time, we need to make our enemy here have a rigid body. This allows it so that actual collision happens, because if we don't have a rigid body, then you can't have colliders unless one of the objects needs to be a rigid body. Alright, so let's disable gravity because these guys do not require gravity. And we will freeze rotation on all axes, X, Y, and Z, and freeze position on only the Y. We can leave X and Z fine. We don't want it to move up and down. Alright, so there we go. Our rigid body and our triggers have been set. And the final thing we need to do is make it so that enemy actually has a tag of enemy, since we are testing for whether or not we have an enemy has touched us with a certain tag. So let's go to add tag and name it enemy. Then we'll go back into our enemy prefab and change the tag to enemy. Alright, so there we go. We can see this little error here. We can just clear that. And yeah, so that is it. The enemy has now been set up. So now if we click on play, click on range here, so we can look at the size of the list here, you'll see that when it touches us, it will actually fill in. The actual list will fill in with the amount of enemies, and as they leave, they'll be taken out. So this last one, now there's nothing. And we'll see that the bullets have spawned in. The bullets have been constantly spawning in. But why are they not shooting at something? You can see that they are actually spawned in, I'm not lying. They are all spawned in, they've been spawning every second as the cubes are in there. The reason why they're not shooting or moving towards anything is because we haven't even made it so it does that. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next episode. Yeah, so there we go. That's exactly how we make the actual testing of, that's how we make it test or whether or not a cube has actually gone here within our range and spawn in some bullets. And there we go. So in the next episode, like I said, we're going to make it so that the bullets actually hit the target of the enemy and basically kill it. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and like the video for more content for the Tower Defense game tutorial series. That's just about it for me, and I'll see you in the next video.